If you're considering pursuing a doctorate in social work, there are two main paths, the practice doctorate and the research doctorate, also known as the DSW and the PhD. And this presentation is going to walk through the focus, history, current status, requirements and formats, careers, and accreditation of each, all while discussing some of the pros and cons. Now, social workers should recognize and check our biases, and boy do I have one, because I love the DSW degree. I'll own that. I have one for a reason, because I found that to be a better option for me. Now, I did run this information by our PhD director to make sure that I was on the right track, but if you ask other people, you invariably will get different answers, so I encourage you to seek multiple perspectives on this. And the other disclaimer here is that these are generalities, and individuals and programs might vary, but this will at least give you an idea of what the typical differences are. Starting with focus. A DSW, which stands for Doctor of Social Work, is a practice doctorate. The idea is that DSWs are practitioner scholars, whereas with a PhD, that's a research doctorate, and the focus is research. So let me tell you the tale of these two doctorates. In social work and many other disciplines, you have practice doctorates and research doctorates. Some other practice doctorate degrees you might recognize include the MD, which is a medical doctor, a DDS, a dentist, a DVM, which is a veterinarian, and a PsyD in psychology. But you can also get a PhD, a philosophy doctorate, in a number of fields. You could get a PhD in physics, history, psychology, and yes, of course, social work too. So in the social work realm, the DSW focuses on advanced professional practice, usually in clinical, leadership, or teaching, or some combination of those. And they apply and evaluate research and disseminate innovative approaches that are practice relevant through a variety of channels. Whereas the PhD is more focused on conducting original research. Now, of course, there's some overlap. DSWs certainly can and do conduct research, and PhDs can and do work on practical applications. They are not mutually exclusive, but there's just more of a leaning or bend towards these areas typically in the curriculum and requirements. So originally the DSW was around years ago, and the curriculum looked similar to what we would actually consider to be a typical PhD curriculum today. It was the most common social work doctorate until the 70s, and then there was this culture shift towards the importance of research and more relevance and clout for PhDs. But then it made a comeback, starting at Penn in 2007, with there being more of an emphasis on practical knowledge and skill building, and it has seen rapid growth in popularity and demand and offerings in recent years. The PhD really reflects academia's preference for a research focus, and it helped to distinguish social work from other practice doctorates like the PsyD and the EdD, and it was the primary doctoral degree in the 80s and 90s, and up until recently it still remains fairly popular, but we're actually beginning to see an inverse where there's more people enrolling in DSWs than PhDs. It's the dawning of the age of the DSW. It is very in demand right now. As you can see from this graph, there's been quite a lot of growth in just the last 10 years alone, with 5 programs in 2015, now approaching 40 in 2025. So certainly a good time to be aware of and pursuing a DSW as it's gained a lot of traction. This chart kind of breaks down some of the key differences between the two, starting with the curriculum focus, although I want to point out this little asterisk in the corner, which again reminds you that individual scholars and practitioners as well as programs vary across institutions, but this is typically what you might see. With a PhD, it's going to be, again, that focus on research methodology, conducting original research, collecting data, and really filling gaps in the literature. looking at, receiving research grants and things like that. Whereas DSW curriculum tends to be more on practice content, where there may be, research things as well, but there's going to be more about advanced clinical leadership or teaching practice areas and less of a focus on the research methodology. The final product in a PhD is typically a dissertation, whereas with DSW, it can be a number of things. Some do banded dissertations, but many call it a capstone project, which often has both a research component and an applied practice component. Typically, PhD programs are usually full-time, and they're usually only offered in person. Whereas with DSW programs, many of them are part-time, designed for busy working professionals, and offered online, although again, there can be exceptions to both of these. The student profile, typically, on average, if we look at average data, most PhD students are full-time, whereas DSWs are working in the field and pursuing their education on the side. PhDs tend to have fewer years of practice experience, whereas those who get a DSW often have decades of practice experience. They're usually much more seasoned practitioners. Overall, the PhD student pool has less diversity, whereas the DSW programs often have students from historically underrepresented groups. And they also tend to be older, partly because they're often more experienced than those seeking PhDs often do that earlier in their career. In many PhD programs, it's funded, which means that you don't pay tuition, and in fact, you maybe get paid a small stipend amount to study it, which sounds great, right? Who doesn't want a free degree? Whereas with DSWs, you pay tuition, and that tuition can vary widely between institutions. But I encourage you to think more about this than just that face value, because since DSW programs often allow you to work, you might actually come out ahead. When I went to pursue my DSW, I did a full cost-benefit analysis of getting a PhD versus a DSW, and even though on the surface it looked like the PhD would be the better deal financially, because I would have to give up working, I actually came out ahead financially, even paying tuition, through a DSW program. Time to complete a PhD usually is 5 or 6 years, depending on how long folks take to complete their dissertation research and writing, whereas a DSW usually can be done in about 3 years total, so usually a faster pathway. And in terms of career path, usually people who graduate with a PhD become tenure track faculty at universities, which means that they primarily focus on research as their main function, although they may also do teaching and service, or they might do research or policy work in the community. Whereas with a DSW, there's a broad range of applications where this can help folks either advance in their careers or open new doors in leadership, either in the community or in education, in clinical practice, or in teaching. That may be tenure track roles in smaller or teaching-focused universities. In the larger R1 research-focused universities, those teaching roles are often more adjunct faculty positions or non-tenure track, which depending on the university is often called clinical or lecturer or professors of practice or something along those lines. And then the PhDs are not accredited. So the Council for Social Work Education accredits BSW and MSW programs, but they historically did not ever accredit any type of doctoral programs. But that's changing. Now in 2025, they've started a couple pilot projects with some initial universities just to get things going, and they'll be offering accreditation more widely to all programs starting in the fall of 2025. And there's different pathways for programs that were already in existence before that versus programs that are new. So at the recording of this video in 2025, hardly any programs are accredited and won't be for another at least year to 3 years. But looking at 2027, 28, 29, 30, and beyond, you're going to start seeing more programs begin to start getting accreditation. That's been a bit controversial because there's not a license tied to accreditation, or at this time any job requirements tied to the DSW being from accredited university, especially given the newness of the accreditation status, but we may see that evolving over time as well. So some things to think about if you're considering a DSW is, are you, more into the creating of original research knowledge as your primary responsibility, or more about leading in innovative practical applications in the field? Do you want to pursue school full-time, or do you want to keep your job as you earn your doctorate? How much flexibility do you need, and does that mean that you want an in-person or an online type program? How fast do you want or need to complete your program? How much are you able to pay out of pocket, and thinking about the opportunity costs of leaving your job, not just in terms of income, but benefits as well? And then what do you want to do with your degree? Do you want to advance in leadership, or deepen your clinical practice, or perhaps open doors or opportunities to become an educator, as we know that social work universities are increasingly requiring a doctorate even for non-tenure track roles? Is that something that you're interested in? So overall, key takeaways here is that there is overlap, but the key difference is the practice focus, being a practitioner scholar, versus the scholarly research focus of a PhD. One's not necessarily better than the other, just different. And depending on who you ask, they may like one better than the other. Just ask me. I'm a huge fan of the DSW, but there's strong advocates for the PhD as being a rigorous degree as well. When you're calculating the costs, just really think about the whole picture, because looks can be deceiving, and you want to consider not only the tuition, but all the other funding elements that come along with that, like whether you can work at the same time. And then you want to ultimately consider what your goals are, what you want to learn about, format preferences, and what the focus of a particular program is on. Here are some references for additional information, and happy to answer any questions you may have.